Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's me Swastika, and in case you're new here, please don't forget to press the subscribe button. So this video is called a rapid fire round key concepts in political science, because in this we are going to rapidly discuss concepts that NTA just loves to ask in all its papers, ranging from master's entrance in DU to JNU and even in UGC net. So the idea of this video isn't to know more. The idea is to know what NTA wants to know from you in its entrance papers. So without any further ado, let's get to it.
Okay, so guys, welcome back, and basically I have done all the hard work for you. I have gone through the question papers of UGC NET Political Science of the years 2017 and 2018, and whatever important key concepts I could find from there, I have drawn out for you. So this is basically going to be a spoon feeding session. This is the spoon, this is you, and this is me just telling you everything so that you can ace your papers. A little about me first. I have done my Masters in Political Science from Jawaharlal Nehru University, CPS. I have done my BA Honours in Political Science from Delhi University. And you can ask your doubts down in the comment section. I reply to all of them. Okay, so let's start off. So in most of the NTA papers, a lot of questions are asked on revolutions. So what NTA does is that they randomly ask you about random revolutions or things that have been junctures and that have led to certain important things. So the first one in that list is going to be Islamic Revolution. So this basically happened from January 1978 to February 1979, and this opposed the Western secular policies of the authoritarian Shah of Iran, Muhammad Reza Pahlavi. So this was essentially an anti-modernization movement which occurred in Iran. The next one that we are going to discuss is Russian Revolution. Obviously, this is very important because this was a period of political and social revolution which occurred between 1917 to 1923, and this commenced with the abolition of a monarchy and was led by the Bolshevik Party. The next is the Glorious Revolution. This is also very important, and it is also called the Revolution of 1688 or the Bloodless Revolution. So this basically was held from 1688 to 1689, and this culminated in establishing a constitutional government in England. This is super important from the perspective of MCQ papers. The next is the Puritan Revolution, which was held in 1649 revolution to limit the arbitrary power of Charles II. So what basically happened in this was that there were two sides. The one side was led by Puritans, who are also called as Roundheads, and this also included middle class and small landowners, and they were pitched against Cavaliers or the nobility. So the idea of this revolution was to limit the arbitrary power of Charles II. The next is going to be some key concepts. The first one is a soft state by Gunnar Myrdal. So this is a very important concept, and this was basically put forward in an Asian drama which was called An Inquiry into the Poverty of Nations. So what happened in this was that two different kinds of states were realized. The first was an empirical state and the second was a soft state. So an empirical state was basically built under strong pressure for disintegration, both domestic and international. So these empirical states were basically in North America, in South America, in Middle East, and even in Asia. The second type of state was a soft state. Also, guys, this is a super important concept. It's popularly asked, so please pay attention. The second thing was a soft state. So a state was called soft because it was felt that they were unlikely of imposing right to development policies and would be unwilling to get against corruption. So this basically means that if a state chooses to do what is popular, if it is a populist state taking populist measures instead of doing what is right and what would eventually lead to the development of the state, it is going to be termed a soft state. So this is all, and basically a soft state is also a state where, because popular measures are taken with the key idea being the appeasement to people, it is going to be more corrupt. The second thing is going to be politics of scarcity. So this is basically was a study on modern India conducted by American scholars, and it talked about a dilemma of free societies to increase the freedom of choice and capacity to affect government by the people through voluntary organizations. So you just have to keep that in mind. Okay, so the next two, The Crisis of Governability by Atul Kohli and Contentious Democracy, are just books and authors you have to keep in mind. The next I am going to talk about is democratic peace theory. So it was the first time that we came across a democratic peace theory. Its very foundation stone was found in the work of Thomas Paine and Immanuel Kant. But when we talk about thinkers who talked about this theory, then we will talk about Michael Doyle and Bruce Russett. So this sometimes is asked that who were the key thinkers. So you have to say Michael Doyle and Bruce Russett. So it's very simple to understand this. It basically states that the democratic peace theory posits that democracies are hesitant to engage in armed conflict with other identified democracies. You may ask why this is so. This is so because most of the democracies want to work in public interest. So, because of basically trying to work in the interest of the public, it doesn't make sense for two democracies to actually go into war with each other, and this eventually means that if country A, let it be USA, and country B, let it be India, are democracies, then they are bound to peacefully work together. In very simple words, this is what it means. Okay, so the next thing is nuclear agreements. This is super important and it's regularly tested. I have gone through almost 10 papers by now, and in all the 10 papers, there is a question related to this. So basically, there are four agreements. One is the Wassenaar Agreement, the next is the Australia Group, the next is the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and the last is Missile Tech Control Regime. So the Wassenaar Agreement basically talks about the export control for conventional arms and dual use technologies. The Australia Group talks about stopping spread of chemical and biological weapons. The Nuclear Supplier Group talks about the proliferation of nuclear weapons. The MTCR talks about the non-proliferation of systems intended for weapons of mass destruction. So the purpose of these groups is self-understood. India is a part of all three of them. Three of them: the Wassenaar Agreement, the Australia Group, and the MCTR. India is, however, not a part of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, even though we are really trying to be a part of it, but we are not, primarily because China is opposing us by citing Pakistan's non-admission to the exclusive group. So, because of this, there is not a consensus that is being made possible because China is completely opposing India's entry. There are other countries that are opposing us, and these include New Zealand, Ireland, and Austria. Okay, so the next one is another theory by Lucian Pye. This is called the modernization theory. So his primary intellectual interest was to explore the cultural differences that help explain why politics differ so greatly from one nation to another. So whenever anyone says Lucian Pie, the first thing that should come to your mind is comparative politics, because there is a comparison that is he's trying to put forward between how and why politics differ so greatly from one nation to another. And the second thing that should come to your mind is the modernization theory. So Lucian Pie has basically focused a lot on third world countries. That has been his primary interest. So you just have to keep that in mind, that why politics are different in developing nations from the developed nations. That is something that Lucian Pie is trying to figure out, especially when we talk in terms of modernization. The next theory that we are going to talk about is W. Rostow, and he has given us the theories of stages of growth. So obviously we are talking about economic growth, and Rostow has basically given us 5 theories. So this is a very popular concept that is asked many times, and whenever somebody asks you about Rostow, the first thing that should come to your mind is the theories of stages of economic growth. The second thing that should come to your mind is the structuralist models of economic growth. So basically, he is echoing the work of David Ricardo, especially in terms of comparative advantage thesis, and by doing so, he is also criticizing Marx. So the theory of modernization that he is putting forward is based on social evolutionism. So this theory of stages of economic growth, according to Rostow, has 5 stages. The first is a traditional society, that is subsistence, barter, and agriculture, which is dependent on a rural economy. The second stage is a specialization, surplus, and infrastructure, which is dependent on social appreciation of education and skill development. The third stage is a takeoff. So this basically, we see industrialization, we see growing investment, we see regional growth, we see political change, which is also dependent on suburban economy. The fourth stage is going to be a drive to maturity, which is going to focus on diversification, innovation, less reliance on imports, and investment. The last is going to be a high mass consumption, in which we see a consumer oriented thing. We also see durable goods flourish. We see service sector becoming dominant. So this is going to be dependent on global economy or market managing economies. So this transition is upward. It's almost from an underdeveloped economy to a fully mature consumerist economy. So this was according to Rostow. Okay, so guys, this is the last thing I'm going to discuss, and it's very important because it's regularly tested in all your papers. Okay, so writs basically come under Article 32 of the Constitution of India when we talk about the Supreme Court of India, and Article 226 when we talk about the High Court. So what basically happens is that if you are person X and your fundamental right has been infringed upon, or something happened that was against the fundamental rights, then you can straight off go to the Supreme Court of India, and the Supreme Court of India can enforce a writ under Article 32 to make sure that your fundamental rights are enforced. Similarly, a High Court can also do the same thing under Article 226, but they can also enforce any other legal right for other purposes. So in that sense, the spectrum of Supreme Court enforcing something is much narrower than the High Court. So basically, the idea of writs comes from the English law, where it was termed as a prerogative writ, and even now it is described as the fountains of justice. So this is a super important topic. It's asked in almost all the papers, and you have to remember this for what it is, because it's a very popularly asked question, and a lot of people make mistakes in it due to the lack of clarity. So the first writ that we are going to talk about is the habeas corpus. This literally means to have the body off. It also is an order issued by the court to a person who has detained another person to produce the body of the latter before it. The court then examines the cause and legality of detention. This is often called as the bulwark of individual liberty against arbitrary detention. Guys, super important to remember this, that it is called as the bulwark of individual liberty against arbitrary detention. So basically, habeas corpus means to have the body off. So a court can simply say that please produce the body of XYZ before us because this person has been detained. That is what it means, and it acts as the bulwark of individual liberty against arbitrary detention. The next thing is a mandamus. So this literally means we command. So the command is issued by the court to a public official asking him to perform his official duties. The writ of mandamus cannot be issued against a private individual to enforce departmental instruction that does not possess statutory force. Duty is discretionary and not mandatory, and it's just to enforce contractual obligation against President of India and the state governors or against the CGI. So against all of these people, the writ of a mandamus cannot be imposed. So basically the writ of the mandamus can be imposed by the court to a public official asking him to perform his official duties. If a public official is not performing the duties that he is entitled to and that he has to, then the court can command him to perform them. So mandamus means to command. That is how you will remember it. The next is prohibition. So even in English, prohibition just means to forbid. So whenever somebody says prohibition, the first thing that should come to your mind is to forbid. So this is issued by a higher court to a lower court to prevent the latter from exceeding its jurisdiction. So basically, a higher court can't forbid a lower court to make sure that the lower court does not exceed its jurisdiction. This is super important, and obviously because the term forbid is used here, we know that it is coming from a higher authority to a lower authority to prevent the exceeding of jurisdiction. It also prohibits direct inactivity. It can be issued only against judicial and quasi-judicial authorities. The next is certiorari. As the word states, it implies to be certified or to be informed. So this is issued by a higher court to a lower court or tribunal, either to transfer a case pending with the latter to itself or to squash the order of the latter in a case. So this is issued in the case of excess of jurisdiction or lack of jurisdiction or error of law. So these are the three cases in which a certiorari is basically issued. So it is preventive as well as curative, and it can be issued against administrative authorities as well. So the scope of this is much broader. The next is a QUES. So as the term states, Q means by what authority or by what warrant. So this is issued by the court to inquire into the legality of claim of a person to a public office by a person. It can only be issued in case of substantive political public office of a permanent character created by the statute or the constitution. So we have to keep in mind that it can only be issued in case of a substantive political office of permanent character created by the statute or the constitution. So that was all for the reads, guys. In case you like my content and in case you found it useful, Please don't forget to subscribe. You can also ask your doubts down below. I try to reply to everyone, and you can connect with me on Instagram. This is my ID. It's Swastikasharma. And thank you for watching once again.